Hi everyone, I'm Corinne Coe and thank you for joining me. This is my first live discussion, so you'll have to bear with me, and hopefully I'll try to minimise the ums and ahs as much as I can. Well, while we're actually waiting for people to actually log in, I'll just introduce myself and a little bit about what I do and the types of conditions that I've actually treated. So I have a private practice in Cleveland, Brisbane, Australia, and I've had this private practice for the last 17 years. I have treated people for almost 20 years now, and the main conditions that I actually treat are anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. So I treat individuals and families, couples, children, and adults and adolescents. So also, while I've got you there, I'd like to mention that I do Skype sessions as well, and I currently have overseas clients as well as interstate. So if anybody wants to ask me any questions about what's involved in the Skype session and how to go about organising that, just message me. Okay, so what I wanted to do is a talk on anxiety, and particularly anxiety in terms of the symptoms, the causes, the main causes, and also treatment. The treatment that I actually use in therapy with most of my clients who suffer anxiety. So I also would love to be able to dedicate a lot more time in another live video chat on post-traumatic stress disorder, and also another one on depression. So at the moment, this is an anxiety video on part one, which is going to give you an overview of what cause, again, like I said, the symptoms, the causes, and treatment. But my second live video will be on anxiety part two, which is pretty much going to give you a lot more information about anxiety treatment, the best type of treatment to cure, because anxiety is curable. So I thought what I would do is start off with some statistics, some pretty shocking statistics. So pretty much 45% of Australians between the age of 18 and 85 will experience a mental disorder at some time in their lifetime. So that's an estimated 9 million people in 2015. So depression is the common mental disorder. Globally, more than 300 million people of all ages suffer from depression. So that's from the World Health Organization statistics. Mental illness is increasing at an annual rate of 20%. So we've got a pretty serious situation with mental illness. And anxiety disorders are experienced in 1 in 7 adults. So now I thought I would actually talk a bit more about the symptoms of anxiety, and the reason for that is because a lot of the clients that I actually get in treatment get very panicky about the symptoms that they're experiencing, because a lot of those symptoms are physical symptoms, and sometimes these symptoms can actually be misinterpreted as pathological or physical conditions. So a lot of the times when you're getting a racing heart, palpitations, tight chest, people assume that they actually are experiencing a heart attack, and so they rush themselves to hospital. And while it's a good thing to check that, I just think that it's probably, if a GP does all the tests and basically say to you that it's symptoms of anxiety, then I think it's just probably the best thing to do is to get some treatment to address these symptoms, because they're very uncomfortable and very fearful, frightening to actually live with. Okay, so the symptoms, there are some common symptoms of anxiety, and not everyone experiences these symptoms. So some people might experience some of them, and others might experience a combination of them or all of them. And in some rare cases, people experience symptoms that are quite rare, like, say, for example, back pain. But anyway, the common symptoms often reported are increased heart rate, palpitations, racing heart, nausea, tight chest, choking sensation, tingling in your arms and legs, wobbly legs, shortness of breath, dizziness and lightheadedness, and sweating. So now there's generalized anxiety and there's specific anxiety and also anxiety attacks, and often known as panic attacks. So with generalized anxiety, pretty much the symptoms of generalized anxiety are experienced like consistently. So you might experience a certain level, and that those symptoms are with you for most of the time, most days, every day, all day practically. So, and there's no specific situation that has to trigger generalized anxiety. So the common cause of generalized anxiety is often low self-esteem or not having good coping skills in place, such as problem solving skills, proactive problem solving skills, and assertiveness, or even a very healthy sense of self-worth. So specific anxiety though is there has to be a specific cause. So it might even be a trauma. So often post-traumatic stress, when there is any triggers or reminders of the trauma, what happens is that it does actually cause you to experience an anxiety attack. So it could even be something like driving anxiety or crowds or even lifts, anything. So that's what specific anxiety. So it is often triggered by a specific event or situation. Now, anxiety attacks, on the other hand, you might experience no anxiety. So you might have a 0 out of 10 and all of a sudden something triggers it to maybe a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 level. So these can actually become very frightening, because some of the symptoms, when they're really, really severe symptoms of panic attacks, can cause you to feel a little bit disorientated or almost like an out-of-body experience. So things become a lot more louder, vision can be blurred. And I'll explain to you next about what causes all these symptoms and what you can actually do to manage them and calm them down. So with panic attacks, like I said, it's usually, it can also develop into an anxiety disorder, panicking about having a panic attack. So panic attacks are something that people try to avoid, and by avoiding means that you're going to avoid situation that provoke the anxiety, and as a result that can actually lead to depression, because what you're doing is you're avoiding situations that you would normally enjoy and situations that will help you to get that stimulation, and that's what anxiety restriction will restrict your life anyway. So now the symptoms of anxiety, I'll explain what causes that, because fear is usually what typically causes anxiety. And oops. Okay, so fear typically causes anxiety. So there has to be a fear that's present, and that could be any kind of fear. And I'll explain later on what those type of fears could actually be. So when you're fearful, what happens is that your brain actually receives a message that you need to be dealing with a life-threatening situation. So what it actually does, it actually prepares you to fight or run away from the danger. So that might be, it releases a lot of adrenaline, almost like a turbo fuel is released. And that turbo fuel, that adrenaline, is meant to help you to become as efficient and as effective as you can. So it will actually make you at your optimal self to deal with a situation, to run away from a situation. And what it actually does is releases that much adrenaline, you release that much adrenaline that it creates those symptoms that you're often experiencing with anxiety. So if too much adrenaline is released, and that fearful situation is not a real situation, so it's a situation that might be anticipated. So it's anticipated fear, perceived fear, something that you expect to happen but doesn't happen, then that adrenaline is going to be released throughout your system. And unfortunately, you're not using up that adrenaline. So if you were running away from a situation, or if you were fighting a situation, then you would actually be using all of that adrenaline up. And as it's actually being released in your system, it's also being used up. So you would not be experiencing these symptoms during a real situation. The problem is that when that adrenaline is released and there is no situation, so it's a situation that is unrealistic, it just sits in your system, waiting and waiting and waiting for you to take action of either running away or fighting that danger. So unfortunately, that is what causes those symptoms. So the symptoms that you would normally get with an overload of adrenaline that's not being used are going to be a choking sensation. So you're going to have the muscles in your neck become firm, because that's what adrenaline does. It causes all this tension in all of your muscles. It tightens everything. So it's almost like a protective thing. So every animal and every human being has this type of protective survival mode, and if it's actually used for a good purpose, then it's quite useful in those sort of situations. But unfortunately, when you actually have an unrealistic fear, all of that adrenaline is just going to be released, and it's going to cause you all those symptoms like a tight chest, because the muscles on your chest become firm and contract, and then you've got nausea, so the muscles in your stomach become very tight and contract as well, so it can give you that sensation of nausea. So all of these symptoms that you're experiencing are pretty much normal symptoms. They're not going to harm you. They're no indication of anything pathologically wrong or medically wrong. All it is that you've got too much adrenaline that you're releasing in your system, but you're not really using that adrenaline up. So what we need to fix is the fear, that unrealistic fear. So what causes that unrealistic fear? The main causes of anxiety is trauma, so post-traumatic stress. So it might be trauma from a motor vehicle accident, might be from an assault or life-threatening event. And so when you actually have, you're traumatized, what happens is sometimes there are triggers, reminders around you that remind you of that situation where you felt extremely vulnerable and where you felt not in control of your life. And when you're experiencing that sense of vulnerability, a high sense of vulnerability, it actually causes you to put yourself in that situation ready to deal with that event again, even if it doesn't occur. So that's the problem with treating with post-traumatic stress. It's about first dealing and treating the anxiety, and then it's about treating the fear that actually, or the trauma that's actually put the sense of control and your sense of vulnerability out of whack. So in therapy, what you would actually do is you would actually fix that so that it comes back down to a normal level, so that you actually feel less vulnerable in that. So now one of the things that another cause of anxiety is, which is a common cause, this one, it's low self-esteem and ineffective coping skills. So people who are prone to have anxiety, when they have low self-esteem, what can happen is that they don't have proactive problem-solving skills, so they're more likely to have reactive problem-solving skills. They also don't have assertiveness skills, so there's that unfortunately causes them to stay within their comfort zone. It causes them to not want to step out of their comfort zone and depend more on people. And the reason for that is because they're frightened of failure. They're frightened of, making a mistake or being criticized or dealing with any kind of a difficult situation. So self-esteem issues is something that can cause generalized anxiety and can actually even trigger anxiety whenever people step out of their comfort zone or have to get out of their comfort zone. So for example, going to an interview. Catastrophic thinking, so negative thinking habits, so the what if, the worst case scenario. What happens, is that you expect the worst always to happen. So again, what you're doing is you're putting your body into defensive mode, like survival mode. So what you're doing is you're releasing adrenaline, you're releasing too much adrenaline that's not warranted for the situation, because that situation may or may not happen. So that catastrophic thinking is often also a common cause of anxiety. So low self-esteem and catastrophic thinking are the two causes that, in the book that I have actually written, Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Life, which is available on Amazon as an ebook and as a print version, it contains all the exercises that I usually use with clients in therapy, to develop self-esteem, coping skills, assertiveness skills, and also to address the catastrophic thinking, the what if. So there's a formula there that I've actually created to help people to change their negative thinking patterns. So perfectionism. Perfectionism is one also. So usually people that suffer post-traumatic stress, there's a common correlation between perfectionism and post-traumatic stress disorder. So people who have always lived and have had a need for control, sometimes when situation happen and it puts them in that sense of control where they feel like they don't have control, that can actually all of a sudden make them realize that they don't have that control, and that then can cause them to experience anxiety attacks. So perfectionism is like usually people who have unrealistic deadlines that they're trying to achieve, their pacing is really high, trying to achieve too much in a short period of time. They have a sense of fear of failure, overcommitment. So the type of people that have these to-do lists, there's long to-do lists that they have to get done by a certain time, by the end of the day. But unfortunately, the more you actually try and fit in and the higher your pacing, the more adrenaline your body's going to release, which is only going to cause you symptoms of anxiety. And unfortunately, once you start to experience anxiety, what will actually happen is that you start to feel like you're not yourself, that you're not, you just feel extremely vulnerable. You worry about getting out and having to face and deal with situations and people, and worry about having an anxiety attack in front of people. And that's one of the things that can actually cause you to continuously experience anxiety attacks, worrying about having panic attacks. So the last most common cause of anxiety is panicking about having a panic attack. So once you've experienced anxiety for a long period of time, you might know that, okay, they're not dangerous, I'm not going to die, I'm not going to faint, I'm not going to have a heart attack. You might get to that point where you know that it is anxiety symptoms, but at the same time you tend to sort of obviously don't want to experience an anxiety attack, so your guard is always up waiting and hoping that you're not going to have an anxiety attack. And so certain situations that might have in the past been anxiety-provoking situations are situations that you're going to want to avoid. And that's the situations that, unfortunately, when you start to avoid, can lead to depression and can lead to agoraphobia. So what I'm going to talk about next is the type of treatment that I usually do with clients in therapy. So there's three parts. Okay, so the first part is getting them to understand what anxiety is, what those symptoms mean, that the symptoms that they're experiencing, what are they about, how they, and the second part is to understand how to manage those symptoms. So by managing the symptoms, I'm talking about reducing the intensity of those symptoms. The third part is addressing the fear, which is what actually brings on the anxiety attacks. So all those three steps are vital in treating anxiety, and anxiety is treatable, but it has to be, have the right treatment to treat anxiety. So the first part is understanding what those symptoms are, and we've talked about that. So it's basically the adrenaline that you're releasing. They're not dangerous symptoms, they just feel uncomfortable. You might be experiencing all these symptoms, like you might be experiencing all these volcanic type symptoms within, but from an outside point of view, people can't really notice that you're actually experiencing. And the more you focus on those symptoms, the more you're actually going to experience anxiety, because the more you focus on, say for example, if you're talking to somebody and you're sort of worried about having a panic attack and you're noticing yourself getting building up, what you're going to be doing is focusing on those symptoms, and you're not going to be paying attention to what the person is saying. So that can actually then obviously make it make you lose confidence. And so sometimes avoiding situations to avoid dealing with anxiety attacks is what people choose to do, which is not a healthy thing to do. But unfortunately, if it's all you can do at the time, that's what unfortunately you're going to have to rely on. So if you can imagine in treatment, like imagine that a tap. So if I'm going to turn the tap on and there's adrenaline that's going to be released, and then I turn the tap off, that adrenaline flow is turned off. So fear is what turns the tap on. And to control the flow of adrenaline, you have to correct your breathing. So you've probably heard about deep controlled breathing many times, but probably didn't quite understand how it works and why. So deep controlled breathing is something that you need to be doing to start managing the symptoms. So by managing symptoms, like I was saying, is reducing the amount of flow by say 50% or more, by increasing your breathing, breathing deeply and slow. And when you breathe deep and slow, what happens is that the message that your brain gets is that, okay, you're wanting to relax, you don't need so much adrenaline, and even though that fear is still there, the deep breathing will actually help to switch off and reduce the amount of adrenaline released. So that means that your brain will actually start to release relaxing hormones rather than adrenaline. But unfortunately, because the fear is still there, whether it's realistic or unrealistic, that unrealistic fear is still there. So unfortunately, you are going to be still releasing some adrenaline, but by controlling it through your deep, slow breathing, what you're actually going to be doing is reducing the intensity and of those symptoms. So with the fear, unfortunately, it's the second part, which is the most complicated part to address, is identifying that fear, because there's so many different causes for anxiety and so many different fear. Because the fears that I read out last time are not the only cause of anxiety. Sometimes you can actually have side effects of medication can cause a bit of anxiety. There might be medical conditions that cause you anxiety, but unfortunately, to treat yourself completely of anxiety, we need to actually address the fear, because that is what the tap is. It's turning the tap on. So we want to completely turn the tap altogether off. And with addressing the fear, it's about going and either seeing a therapist or trying to identify that fear. So I went through some of those common ones with you just before. If you can identify with any of those, my advice would be to go and see a therapist, and bring that information into the therapy, so that therapist can actually work with you at addressing that specific fear that keeps triggering the anxiety. But in the meantime, managing your symptoms is a good start, because when you do your deep, slow breathing, it's not going to be useful when you're having a severe panic attack. And for some of you who may have tried it during a severe anxiety attack, it probably will work a lot more effectively with mild to moderate, but not a severe anxiety attack. Once you experience a severe anxiety attack, all you can actually do is just let it happen. And when that adrenaline is removes out of your system, then you will start to sort of go back to your normal self and that. But in the meantime, the symptoms, the deep, slow breathing, I would be doing it every single day from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to bed, increasing your breathing to deep, slow breathing all day will help you to keep that adrenaline at a lower level. So should something startle you or cause you to feel a lot more anxious, then what will happen is that you won't escalate to a full-blown anxiety attack if you control your breathing and control the flow of adrenaline. So now and once you've actually gained confidence in managing those symptoms, it'll be a lot easier to step out of your comfort zone and to desensitize and slowly introduce the things in your life that you want to bring back into your life. So now medication, I'm not qualified to specifically talk too much about medication. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm a psychologist. But one of the things that is crucial is for you to talk to your GP about making sure that if anxiety is your primary condition, then my recommendation is that you specifically have a prescription for medication for anxiety, not for depression, even though depression might actually be a secondary condition, because it's quite common to have anxiety and depression at the same time, because when you're restricted by anxiety, you are going to experience depression as well. So when you actually address depression, even if it's a secondary condition, you're really not targeting the symptoms of anxiety. So it's really, really important to make sure that your GP specifically addresses the primary condition, and if it is anxiety, then that's the condition that you treat with medication. So like I said, controlling your breathing all day, every day, deep, slow breathing. So there's no real specific technique. It's just, breathing in and expanding your lungs as much as you can, breathing in, breathing out. And that's going to signal to your brain to shut down the adrenaline. So it'll reduce the adrenaline, and as a result, it'll reduce those symptoms. So, but addressing the fear, so that is the part that is the most complicated, and unfortunately, some of it, it might need to go and see a therapist. So it's not easy to address the cause, the trigger of anxiety without actually getting therapy. But with the medication, and it doesn't mean to say that you have to have medication. If the controlled breathing works at reducing the symptoms, and if your symptoms are not as intense to not interfere with therapy, then you don't really need to go on medication. But for a lot of cases, it is important to calm your symptoms down so that your focus is on the cognitive behavior therapy and the therapy session, rather than worrying about the symptoms that you're experiencing. Because sometimes when you experience anxiety attacks or even post-traumatic stress, you don't want to experience when you're experiencing anxiety, you don't want to experience that. And so sometimes avoiding therapy or avoiding any anxiety-provoking situation is what people tend to do. But unfortunately, you're not going to go and treat yourself of anxiety by avoiding. So the first couple of sessions might be uncomfortable, but once you start going through it, it will actually be a lot easier for you to handle the sessions. So with addressing the fear, it's really important. So for some of you who've gone to therapy and it's not been as effective, I would actually be more likely to try and find another therapist if you haven't really have had any therapy hasn't been that effective. And what I would actually do is try to identify for yourself what that actual fear is. So you might even be doing a diary form initially before going into therapy, and try to work out what triggers that. And then once you've actually got that fear, it's about going to a therapist and then sort of working through that fear, and that will completely be a vital step in your treatment. So, but like I was saying, if it's post-traumatic stress, to treat post-traumatic stress, you have to first address the anxiety. So once you've got the anxiety under control, then it will be a lot easier to deal with the trauma. Because when you've got post-traumatic stress, your mind's been shocked of what it's actually witnessed. And it's not easy to erase these memories. And so one of the things that you have to do is, first of all, treat the anxiety, because unfortunately it's like a vicious cycle. You've got the triggers of the trauma that actually cause you to experience an anxiety attack, and to avoid anxiety attack, you avoid dealing with the trauma, and so sometimes that can actually be a problem. So you need to break that cycle with your therapist by addressing the anxiety first, and then you can actually work on with the therapist on the actual trauma. And in doing that, it's about putting that sense of vulnerability and sense of control in alignment. Because when your sense of vulnerability is high, that's always going to keep you in a state of anxiety. So the catastrophic thinking, it's something that you have to work through again with a therapist. Like I said, the book that I've written, Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Life, does actually contain the strategies. So for those of you who can relate to that particular fear, my advice would be to read the book and learn those strategies to start applying and start to correct those unhealthy thinking patterns. The same with self-esteem. So building your self-esteem will build your resilience. Once you build your resilience and the coping skills, that's only going to sort of help to, again, make you feel less vulnerable. And the less vulnerable you feel, the less anxiety you're going to experience. And with perfectionism, what I would probably do is maybe look at buying some books or looking on YouTube on how to correct and reduce your unrealistic standards and address perfectionism, so that you're not overcommitting and you're not over-pleasing. And unfortunately with perfectionism, people adapt perfectionism because they need that sense of achievement to feel worthy. So you might have to work at correcting that with a therapist as well. So I hope that you enjoyed listening to, and I hope it's been of value to you, all this information on anxiety. Just to recap, so the anxiety symptoms are normal symptoms. They're just caused by too much release of adrenaline. So there's nothing really wrong with you physically. It's just a normal survival response that all animals and human beings have. And what actually triggers that is an unrealistic fear, that you have to identify what that is as a starting point for treatment. With treatment, it's about understanding those symptoms, no longer fearing those symptoms, and also managing the symptoms with your deep, slow breathing. I would persist with the breathing, because sometimes for some people it works pretty quick, and others it might take a little bit longer. But the more you persist, the more effective it will actually be. And what I'm going to be doing is another live discussion, part 2, on anxiety, and specifically work on talking more about, in more detail, the treatment. So this has only been just an overview, and I will also be doing some live discussions on post-traumatic stress and on depression in the next few weeks. So I hope, like I said, you found this helpful. I will be posting the video on my Facebook page, and please, please, please share it with your friends, because they might not be suffering from mental illness or anxiety, but they may know somebody that might. it's also a good idea to share it with friends and family so they can actually support you also as much as they can. By the more understanding, the more support you're going to be getting. And please leave any feedback. I'd love to hear your feedback. And well, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon.